Hey, good morning, everybody. It's whatever day of the week it is. Is it Tuesday? It only
Hump
feels.
day. It's Wednesday.
It,
Hump day.
is it Wednesday? Hump day. I don't know. I worked all last weekend. It's been a while since I've had a day off, so they're all every day is hump day. But welcome back. Here we are, beholding a world seemingly gone mad, and thankfully so, because otherwise, what would we talk about? So the debt ceiling. I don't know what your take is on that, Mike. I've been ignoring the story for a while because it's so depressing, frankly. I mean, we have a Congress that can't function. We have a budget that we can't balance. We set these arbitrary lines in the sand and say that the government can assume so much debt, no more. And then as we roll more debt into the national debt, we approach the limits, and then the parties bitch and moan at one another and threaten to shut the government down for one reason or another. And sometimes it's shut down for a while and then it's not. I pick up the papers this morning and I see all sorts of dire possibilities. Social Security recipients may not receive their checks. The interest rates may rise. The stock markets may go crazy. And I begin to think, really? I mean, I understand the difference between Keynesian, fiscal policy and monetary policy. That sometimes you need to spend. The government needs to spend to pump the prime, or to prime the pump, rather.
Money needs to go brrr.
But and that government that you can't analogize an individual's management of their own fisc to that of the government. That there is a value to counter cyclical spending and so forth. I understand all that, but I wonder whether we've outgrown that, and I wonder whether we've reached a point of where we've reached the limits of what it is that we can do as a society. And I don't mean to black pill us this morning, but what I do mean to suggest is the following. We've got a collective sense of society. We've got a government, we've got a society, we've got management of expectations, we've got a number of groups all bringing claims to limited resources, and some of those limited resources come in the form of government programs and or expenditures. And now we've expanded the market of those claims without a corresponding commitment to increasing value. What am I talking about? All these identitarian claims. How, for example, are we going to pay reparations when we can't balance the budget and we're approaching the debt ceiling? I mean, how's it going to work in San Francisco when they suddenly decide that every descendant of a slave is worth a $5 million check, and they've got a declining tax base? How are they going to pay for that? How are we going to support diversity, equity and inclusion in our investment decisions when the market is such that there's already a limited return on what we can do? And what I'm trying to suggest is, in however inarticulate a way that I'm doing it, is all of these commitments to impose additional costs on every transaction. And these transactional costs accumulate without a corresponding return in value. And the result is that they have to be subsidized by someone. And usually that someone is the taxpayer. Or if you're in a DEI investment regime, it might come in the form of an opportunity cost, where in order to do an ESG investment, an investment that is somehow sounded in equity and sound governance, or whatever it is that ESG stands for, you accept less of a return. And so the marginal cost of a commitment to social justice might be something that is easy to bear in a flourishing economy when all boats are rising. But when you've reached a point where the economy isn't flourishing, and you have to make cost-benefit decisions, what do you stop paying for? Do you stop paying for ESG? Do you stop paying for diversity? Because in the end, all that these programs do is make people feel better. They don't feed people. They don't make things.
This is interesting. You've skipped over something that I want to start with, Norm.
Then please do, because I'm a little out of focus.
Speaking of reaching limits, right?
Oh, well, yeah.
Boston Celtics were down 3-0 last night, heading into Game 4 of the.
Wait a minute, how do we go from ESG, reparations, to debt ceiling to the Celtics?
Circle. I was looking for my opportunity because I was like, damn, Norm just jumped off the bridge and his bungee cord isn't tied. So let me tie it real quick and then get mine on. And now I'm jumping with you. But here's what's going on in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Celtics survived. They won last night behind the effort of Jason Tatum with 33 points, I think 10 rebounds, 9 assists, something like that. And it was a pretty decisive victory. Now, those are important games, elimination games. We saw LeBron and his Lakers were unable to get over the hump against the Nuggets. Now, the Nuggets are a much more powerful team than either of the Celtics or the Heat from my perspective. So perhaps a different set of facts. But this is an important thing for watchers of the game, young people especially, to see that it's never over, right? It's not over until it actually is over. And there are plenty of people expecting that the Celtics would sort of, their clover would fold up and they would look to next season. I call it an embattled franchise because their head coach was pretty ceremoniously terminated from the team because of an HR issue that remains a mystery. So they've had this young guy coaching them all season that can't seem to really find the spirit or the rhythm of the group of guys that he has, even though this Celtics team was in the finals last season. They're relatively unchanged as far as composition goes. But I'm bringing up the NBA at this juncture because of the ESG thing. One thing I think I talked to you.
So what is ESG exactly?
Environmental social governance scores, right?
Okay.
So it's basically a scorecard for, and I don't hasten to say woke, but we're on limited time here. So it's mostly a woke report card. And there are, BlackRock, JP Morgan, the largest financiers of the American economy, and those who have tremendous influence over the European Union and the financials there, have developed this scorecard in an effort to basically figure out a way to pick winners and losers based on these arbitrary notions of, what is your environmental impact, and how are you minimizing your carbon footprint? What is your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do you represent the demographics of your society within your company? Are you making sure that you look and feel like the
So in other words, it's scoring values in the marketplace.
Correct.
But the marketplace, hasn't the task of economics been to date the maximally efficient creation and distribution of goods and resources? When you add values to the economic equation, are you burdening the economy at the expense of goods and services?
Yes, 100%. And here's an example that's very easy to absorb. The NBA is the marquee event of professional basketball the world over. I mean, it is the organization, and the National Basketball Association is a male sport. It is the most profitable. Now, I would argue that the decisions that they have been making, the NBA, since COVID and even a few years before that, have been in the ESG framework, right? The NBA is a way for the United States to export its culture and its domestic policy internationally. The NBA has a massive presence in China. The NBA has a massive presence.
What culture are we exporting to China?
And so this is what it's difficult for me to articulate these things. And
well, you're going to have to now because you're on the hot squat, buddy.
But so what are we exporting? That is the question, right? The same question that we would ask to say, why are we raising a rainbow flag above our embassies over the rest of the world? What message are we sending? What are we signaling? And what does that mean for adversaries? But what I want to focus on the domestic issue here, especially the ESG stuff, because we'll transition into the Bud Light stuff here in a few minutes after we talk more about the debt ceiling. But here's an easy example of the failure of something that is ESG minded. The NBA, after all of the rigmarole behind the U.S. women's national soccer team and them saying that they weren't compensated fairly based on their, comparison to their male counterparts, all this other BS that we've seen, even though those sports are not profitable whatsoever, the WNBA is now being set side by side in every advertisement for the NBA that I am seeing. They are.
But the sports just aren't they're not equally entertaining.
It doesn't matter, Norm. That's not what ESG is about. ESG is an outright rejection of meritocracy. It is an outright rejection of natural market forces, and a recognition that certain things are more profitable and more interesting to consumers than others. But because we live in this climate where everybody has to feel as though they are as important as their counterpart who may be more more physically gifted naturally, who may have a better work ethic, who may command better payment out in the open market.
Who may be more fun to watch. I mean, look,
Correct. Correct.
let's not overthink the NBA. It's entertainment, it's sports. I like to watch physically impressive specimens do things that I can't imagine being able to do myself and say to myself, "Holy, holy bleep, did you see that?" And when I watch the NBA, I see that. When I watch the WNBA, I think, women can't jump. And it feels to me like I'm watching the NBA with gauze over it. And it's just, I'm not willing to spend as much time, or certainly in my lifetime is money, so to speak. That's a resource at my disposal. I make a utility decision, to speak in a way a microeconomist would. There is less utility to me in watching the WNBA. And there's nothing that adjusting the market with an ESG score or no subsidy that a taxpayer can fund that's going to change that. And so,
That's what the NBA is ultimately doing right now. They are using the NBA, their best product. They are using that to subsidize and appease this climate that has been driven from the top down. Recall Kyrie Irving. He's a name that everybody got to know during the COVID, and particularly when it came to the I saw it referred to yesterday online as the Great Experiment. When it came to vaccine mandates, he was a player on the Brooklyn Nets at the time. New York is obviously the epicenter of a lot of these big funds, big banks, and the blue culture, as it were. And he was put through hell, quite frankly, because he would not march in lockstep with what the NBA had decided was what they were going to do. Recall, the NBA put their entire product in a bubble down in Florida for the 2020 NBA playoffs.
Okay, but I want to focus. I want to focus on basics, Mike. You talked about subsidies. A subsidy is a transfer of resources to increase or to from one party to another to help another party enter or remain in or compete in a market they wouldn't otherwise compete in. And so subsidies are costs on the system. Somebody pays the price of a subsidy, and so I go to the debt ceiling discussion because I wonder what the hidden cost of our commitment to social justice is. I wonder what the hidden cost of our commitment to making sure everybody feels good is. And I think what you're saying is that there's a case study of that in the NBA, but I don't want you to get too deep into the weeds about the players, because I don't follow the sport that carefully. What relate the NBA thing to the debt ceiling discussion and the question of subsidies, and can we afford to subsidize all of our desires to feel good, all of our desires for inclusion? And if we can't, what's the solution? My suggestion is the solution is returning to the politics of old. That the debt ceiling limitation discussions present an opportunity to question whether we're subsidizing nonsense, and whether our politics have become all about the froth and not about the beer itself. And isn't this an opportunity to knock some of the froth off and just say, look, we can't afford to be as self-indulgent as we are, and so let's decide what we can eliminate. Not everybody gets to feel good.
Well, the NBA as a product, the mandate of the NBA, the National Basketball Association, is something like to maximize returns for its shareholders. And its shareholders are the 32 NBA franchises that make up the National Basketball Association. And each of these franchises shares in that role to put the best product on the floor. This is the reason for the the elite level scouts. This is the reason for the long and drawn out vetting process for lottery picks and tiering players like that, and doing a lottery system for the best players to join the worst.
Okay, so it's simply a market driven enterprise, and
absolutely.
So the lottery helps distribute the limited goods that are available in the market. That is talented.
Think about what drives the value. The value has been driven off the back of Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Wilt Chamberlain, Clyde Drexler, Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant. These are the elite performers within the NBA framework that have driven its value to be able to start to translate into new markets across the globe. What's happening now is that goodwill and that brand value is being used to subsidize what is not a profit-making enterprise in the WNBA. And it's not just putting the product on the floor and marketing it alongside the NBA. It's also approaching Nike and Adidas and trying to come up with sneaker deals for these new female influencer athletes in a way to try and mirror the success of their male counterparts. So it's
okay. So I get that. So the subsidies are designed to try to persuade us that there is equal value to us as consumers of the athletic experience in watching women, but we know in our hearts there's not. And so no amount of subsidization is going to persuade me that women's basketball is as entertaining as men's. And I don't apologize for making that statement, because after all, I'm the one who's being entertained, and I'm not going to be finessed into saying all things are equally entertaining. They're not. All literature is not all as good as one another. All written pieces aren't as good. All people can't do the same things in the same way. And let's just get right down to it. Equality is an aspirational goal, and we're all entitled to equal respect, but we're all not equal in our abilities and skills. And so the market rewards people with superior abilities and punishes those without them. Subsidies are designed to help create a sense of equality, but how much equality can we afford? And at what point does the commitment to equality impose costs that are unworthy that we can't afford to bear? And does the debt ceiling illustrate that? That's my interest here.
I think so. And I'm reminded, the reason I was smirking there is the name Brittany Griner flashed across my frontal lobe there. And I'm reminded that the Biden administration traded a known war criminal to Russia right before the Ukraine conflict really, really ignited, that we traded a known arms dealer, Russian arms dealer, for something to the tune of a return of a WNBA player in Brittany Griner. Right.
And what species of madness made that seem like a good deal?
I don't know. I still to this day don't know, unless there is something deeper there that gets us into conspiratorial waters, but definitely takes us off topic with respect to the debt ceiling. But that is a type of decision that on its face represents the disconnect that we're talking about right now. Why would you make suboptimal decisions in the face of much better decisions if you could help it?
And okay, so suboptimal decisions. So that's a way forward in this discussion. So there is a market, and the distribution of goods and services in the most efficient manner is the goal of macroeconomics. Microeconomics is a study of how people make decisions about their individual utility, their sense of what's valuable. A government that tries to influence the economy to embrace a different vision of what's good than what the market does, distorts the market and imposes costs on the market. I can't help but wonder whether this notion of it, this crisis with the debt ceiling, and I want to pivot a little bit to the ESG crisis and what's going on with Vivek and company. I can't help but wonder whether we're at a moment right now where economic crises are holding up in relief our commitments to these various notions of social equity, and saying we really can't afford the cost of all this nonsense, and whether this gives us an opportunity and gives our politicians and our political class an opportunity to address fundamental value without talking about individual values. I mean, I don't really want to be told, that somehow Dylan Mulvaney is precious. I don't give a shit about Dylan Mulvaney and his or her or its libidinal desires. This is just not something that interests me. What interests me is the ability to navigate in a world with my own sense of utility without having additional costs crammed down my throat by the government, so that others who I just don't really have any interest in at all feel better about themselves and about what they compel me to make, what they are able to compel me to do. And so the Bud Light moment and the Bud Light boycott, the Strive Asset Management issues that we're about to discuss shed a light on this. Tell us what's going on with Strive Asset Management, Mike.
Strive Asset Management was co-founded by two people, Anson Frericks, who is quoted in this Daily Wire article and who also wrote an op-ed in Fox News, and one and only Vivek Ramaswamy. Strive Asset Management is a fund and a portfolio that has as its central theme, its thesis, its investment thesis, that it is anti ESG. That is, it is a return to. I mean, in a way, Norm, it's interesting because it's not innovative in terms of an idea. It's innovative in terms of the timing of its deployment, because prior to the modern ESG framework, where all the major financial players pivoted into this model of suboptimal decisions in favor of some sort of intangible appeal to whatever, it was very fundamental. What investments are going to make returns for investors, right? What investments in global macro markets are going to create a bigger gross domestic product and thus make the United States a wealthier, more influential enterprise. And
And by wealth, by the way, I think economists, economics is called the dismal science, because nobody really wants to talk about money, and they want to talk about value. But I think when you talk about making the United States wealthier, I think what you're not saying is making bank accounts bigger, but giving people a more robust sense of their own utility and efficacy and greater sense of choices, so that individuals have the ability to make their own utilities decisions. In other words, we all have our own utility function. That is, at the margins, what is it that you expect to do with your next increment of time? That next increment of time ideally will be invested or spent on doing something that yields you a greater sense of well-being. And so I think, in contrasting views of the economy and society, somebody like Vivek will say individuals should be free to make their own determinations of value. Somebody far to the left and in the ESG environment will say, no, because when they do, that creates systemic inequities. Therefore, government has to come in and address these inequities. And that means that we're going to put a surcharge in the form of subsidies on some activities and penalties on others, to redistribute things such that the markets will correct for inequality. And this is a fundamental disagreement in the politics of our time. Forget all the culture wars and everything else. It has to do with distributive justice. It has to do with the relationship between government and the economy. And suddenly we begin to see a way to conceptualize politics that gets us beyond the last 4 to 8 years and all the craziness with Trump and the Trump haters. The question is, how and who gets to decide? How is it decided, and who gets to decide how you spend the next increment of your time, and how you are represented in the market, and whether your interactions in the market are going to be surtaxed in the name of redistributing things in ways that you do or don't agree with.
yeah, I think what you're describing, the way I hear that, is sort of an appeal to the wealth of mind, not necessarily the pocket, but morale almost, right? And there is a case to be made here, and I think I'm making it, even in my brief diatribe yesterday regarding sort of the FDA and the need.
Yeah, say more about that, because I didn't understand what you were saying when you said it, and all day long I thought, wow, we got to get back to that. So here we are.
So it appears to me that the ESG framework has one core mission, and that is to vacuum morale out of wealthy nations. And I don't know where that morale goes, but it manifests as more of a unilateral sense of power, right? So if the banks have deployed this strategy, and we can look at the Bud Light issue as one of the great failures of ESG right now, in that the nation writ large, the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of potential daily beer customers are now pushed away from a purchase that puts them in the middle of a political conversation that they do not want to have, not because they are necessarily bigoted, not necessarily because they have a very mature and informed opinion on where they stand, but because they don't have any practical application for having that opinion to begin with.
Okay, so maybe another way of saying this, and I'm really struggling with this because I've been trying to figure this out for several years now. That the Bud Light situation is an example of imposing a surcharge on a transaction that is the purchase of beer that is unrelated to an individual consumer's utility function, and that surcharge is a cost that they choose not to bear, so they boycott the market. That's a powerful way
Well,
of
and
looking.
that's what, so, and Anson Fredericks, and for those listening and watching, I did introduce him as the president and co-founder of Strive Asset Management. He was also the president of AB InBev, so Bud Light's parent company, for over a decade. He worked with AB InBev for over a decade. So this isn't a man who knows not of what he speaks. He is speaking directly to the issue that the Bud Light stain is not one that is going to wipe off. And that is because I think, Norm, what you and I are co-locating around right now is revelatory to me, because I think that what we're saying is that until this moment, we have been shooting at a basket that we couldn't necessarily see with respect to trying to source or label what the problem or problems are. The reality is, it seems as though their ESG has imposed an invisible tax.
Absolutely.
It doesn't
Yeah.
appear on a balance sheet, but nonetheless is vacuuming out morale and cohesion in American society.
So I'm following everything you say, but I'm not understanding the use of the term morale there. I think of morale as spirit, as a willingness to, as an appetite for life. And so a person with low morale has low appetite for life. When morale is high, you're able to take on challenges that might, if intimidated you on another day.
Yeah,
How are you using the
I'm
term
thinking
morale?
emotionally buoyant, right? Something that in a morale, if you're in a leadership position at all, whether it's, a sports position or on a team of lawyers, Norm, leadership and morale is incredibly important, because it matters not what sorts of problems that you need to solve or hurdles that you need to leap. It matters more that you're committed to solving those problems and leaping those hurdles. And as Americans, we have relied in large part historically on the intellectual pluralism of our time that was grounded in a system of justice that we trusted, that we didn't necessarily have to arrive at the same conclusions, hold the same opinions, pray to the same God, but that in the marketplace of ideas and in the normal day-to-day civil society and commerce, that there was a standard by which we would all abide. And when I say that it's vacuuming morale, it is reducing people to the lowest common denominator and it's forcing a sensitivity filter on top of individual behavior that we have
Absolutely.
historically not had, so that people are going to 10 rather than 4 in the face of a fact pattern that they don't necessarily agree with, or that makes them feel uncomfortable, which results in what? Rise in domestic disputes, rise in illicit drug use and alcohol, these sorts of things as coping mechanisms, as escapism. We've seen the fentanyl crisis. Overall, country morale is dictating the current symptoms of our ills as a nation. And I know we started by talking about the debt ceiling, but isn't all that wrapped up in the same thing? We can talk about discretionary spending, but this was a concept that we were talking about over and over and over again during the Trump administration. I think there was 3 or 4 times that the debt ceiling issue came up alone during the Trump administration, because of how volatile the politics had become.
Well, and so but now we're back, and we're back at it. And so I want to advance the proposition that the debt ceiling discussions are a good occasion to focus on the additional costs that are imposed by a commitment to ESG, to ESGness, as it were, and that the Bud Light boycott represents a powerful voice of what I'll call ground level populism. People are saying, hey, look, we live in our own skins. We know what we like and what we care about. We don't care about Dylan Mulvaney, and we don't care about having an agenda crammed down our throats that we don't agree with. And our values matter. And so we are going to take it to the marketplace, and we're going to punish somebody who's imposing this additional tax on us. And I wonder whether that same sort of populist impulse can be directed to the national stage, and to say, with respect to the debt ceiling discussions, because we have to find a way out of this, we are living a life we can't afford. And because of that, we continue to accumulate debt. And while the analogy between an individual household and a society may not hold, I understand the arguments for and against that. It's not entirely inapplicable. And we need to trim at the margins what we can't afford. And what we can't afford is what doesn't produce value in the marketplace of goods and services. Creating a market designed on everybody feeling good about themselves and their idiosyncratic expectations or expressions of self may be a luxury we can't afford. And so, as we get into the 2024 election, are any of the candidates going to be able to harness these ideas that we're talking about into a platform and into a manner and into a message that might mobilize voters? I think the moment is wrought, and it could be good.
I think that if there's a candidate that ever comes across these streams, that they should call ESG a luxury tax on the wealthiest nation in the world, because that's what it is. And this may be our Boston Tea Party moment, to be honest, because I've seen the memes. We've all seen the memes. We started a revolutionary war over a 2% tax without representation. Now we're taxed at 40% and we just deal with it. I think that that's binary thinking that doesn't serve a meaningful purpose in and among this discussion. I think that the better comparison is we started a war over a 2% tax without representation, and that ESG is the same type of tax.
Well, it could be. So let's get the war on. Let's bring it.
We actually have to point at it and call it a tax.
It's a great a luxury tax. ESG is a luxury tax, and for a luxury that we may not be able to afford. And that luxury is saying to everyone at all times, regardless of their expression, everything you want to do, dear, is valuable. That eliminates the concept of excellence. And candidly, Dylan Mulvaney, I don't give a shit.
Right.
And if you're going to try to broadcast whatever it is you are on my goods and services and make me pay more for it, I ain't paying.
And to the extent the ESG results in a sort of subversion of the meritocracy that we began this conversation with around the MBA, that again goes back to my point about a declining sense of morale. How valid is one, and how am I supposed to teach my son that he is to do his best, right, every day for himself, if society writ large begins to stamp out traditional meritocracy? And that we're going to replace that with some egalitarian sense of what? That's godless. It's a void that doesn't get filled but by anybody except for government. So
no, it's the pot saying to the potter, why makest me thus? Mike, you and I are inching towards some common understanding of something. We're still far apart. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow, I hope. How do people find us?
You know how to find us. We're on Rumble, we're on YouTube, and we're on Twitter. Please subscribe to us, follow us, share the streams. If you are unable to catch this live and you'd like to take it with you on the go, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, over wherever podcasts are found. Just be sure to rate us 5 stars, leave a nice comment. We always like reading those. And if you're feeling particularly generous, become a member and gift a subscription on Locals. That's lawandlegitimacy.locals.com. We're live every day, 8 a.m., Monday through Friday, on all 3 of those streaming platforms I just mentioned. And I want to give a quick shout out to the regulars in the chat. We've got BTL, Lawyer Will, it's me again, over on Rumble. We've, of course, got Luttrell and Rachel Perry Goff over on YouTube. Thank you all for always being here and contributing. We very much appreciate the feedback. We'll see you tomorrow, Norm.
Ciao. We will.